So now we're going to move on to the next part, which is navigating demographic transition and projecting future populations. And what we really want to know is your fertility rates. How fertility rates can impact population growth changes. And we know that fertility rates are very much different from your birth rates and your death rates. So again, we are looking at rates, but over a time period, especially when we look at when we look at women, that over a woman's lifetime, if you think about how is this really important, the more children a woman has, and the more of that children actually survive to adulthood, and they have their own children, that's going to make the population grow faster. So more people, having their own children, and that really shows that population growth. And we have over here this diagram that shows you what's going on in India. How many people are having how many kids? And what is this? What we call is your replacement fertility rates. And this number is really important to know. It's super intuitive, okay? Because if you have two parents and they are having two children, they are basically replacing themselves. So you basically have two people, and then two parents and then two kids. So your population growth rate is zero. And the number of birth rates basically equals the number of that. Okay. And so you're basically just replacing yourself and your partner if you just have two kids. And also, when we talk about replacement fertility ratio, it's 2.1. And why is it 2.1 and it's not 2.0? And that is because, your statistics. Not all children survive to adulthood. So we have that little fudge number to account for those children who do not survive on average. So if everyone has 2.1 children, it makes up for the number of children that die. So your replacement level fertility ratio, is a lot of times very, very different in different parts of the world. So if we look at India, we see that some places are 2.9, some places are 1.6, 1.8, some places are 3.2. And if you kind of look at the replacement fertility rate in around the world, it used to be a lot higher. It used to be around 4 or 5. But that number has come down significantly. And that's why we see your population growth rates actually declining really fast. And kind of looking at what is going on and trends in India and China. And when we kind of look at that, we have to understand that in the 1970s, if you just look at this diagram over here, what we are seeing is that, sorry, I'm not sure. What we are seeing through this diagram over here, basically, we see that in the 1970s, both of them were actually having that similar high population. They started out at similar points. But when we kind of look at what by the time it got to, in your by the time it got into your late 1970s, there was a really significant drop in China. And it had gone down significantly because, when we look at women, on one hand in India, the rates of that fertility rate was actually going down much more gradually. And it really differs, across the country, across the world. We also see how it can differ in different regions. So what was actually going on in China? Basically, if we look at China, it has currently now it has one of the lowest fertility ratio, and the replacement fertility ratio in China currently is around like 1.2 births per woman. And India is about 2.0, okay, which is just below the replacement threshold of 2.1. And according to your United Nations, latest projections, India's population is going to expect to reach its peak in about 2064. And we know currently that India has overtaken China as the world's most populous country in the world. And what are some of the key determinants that has really driven this? It's kind of looking at that improvement of public health nutrition, improved levels of education, especially for women. Also your urbanization access, access to urbanization, also your access to contraceptives, reproductive health planning, uh, and also, looking at family planning, labor force, participation, labor force participation, your women empowerment, and basically what we are trying to see is that, sorry, it's stuck. What we are also noticing is just that different kinds of policy. China and India are currently home to 1/3 of the world's population. And China, basically, when they first started it, they started out with this later, longer, and fewer policy. Basically, it's just, saying that you should get married later, you should wait for a long period of time before having your kids, and then having fewer kids. And then from there, they moved on to the stricter one-child policy. And it was really a concerted effort to curb rapid population growth rate through policies that targeted fertility. So that with that, it first started out with that later, longer, fewer, that really brought down the number of children that were being born. And that led to that decline in your late 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. But India, on the other hand, we see that it was the National Family Welfare Program that began in the 1950s, and they had their own policy priorities, which had very different impact across different parts of the state. For example, we see in Kerala and in Tamil Nadu, they really emphasize socio-economic development and women's empowerment. So that decline, the replacement fertility rate declined a lot earlier at a much more rapid pace, falling below that replacement level decades before the country as a whole. But in places where we see higher numbers, till now, they just didn't really invest a lot in human capital. And so there was this slower economic growth. But I want to also kind of highlight that in both countries, basically there was forced sterilization. And in China, we see the effects of this. In China, with the one-child policy, particularly, we see that men, okay, the men in Asian culture really do play that important role of being that caregiver or taking over their family's business. So if he does end up marrying, his wife will basically take care of his parents, uh, you know, her her father and her mother-in-law. And both in China and India, they always used to prefer, especially in China with the one-child policy, they used to kill off a lot of girls. And now it's become a huge problem because when you look at demographic trends, we see that there are more and more people not getting married in China. And this is because in order to get married, the man of the boy's family will have to pay what we call a dowry. Basically, that's a sum of money to the girl's parents. And that amount has significantly increased. It does not correlate with the salary that people are earning. Okay, it's so much more higher. And so when we kind of look at this and we look at just the number of people having kids in China, and that has really shrunk. The government actually changed it over in year 2016, okay, where they brought it up to 2 kids that each family could have. And we also see that fertility rates were not going up, it was still dropping. And we see that now in 2021, they have allowed 3 kids. Okay. And we also have to kind of understand that that really importance of what's going to happen when we see people when we see a more elderly and a much more aging population, especially when we talk about your 2030 and your 20 but when we reach 2050. And but when and so we are estimates, there's going to be 2 times more the people above the average age of 65. And what are some challenges? Kind of looking at your healthcare, your social insurance systems. And when we talk about the UN Sustainable Goals, we are looking at policies and programs to influence fertility levels that are grounded on human rights perspective. Kind of looking at your reproductive rights to promote gender equality, ensure environmental sustainability, and protect and preserve the planet for future generations. And when kind of just looking at all this, what did China and India do in early on, say where they use really forceful coercive measures in some location? Um, especially in China, we see that, it's the fertility rates really did decline. But in India, on the other hand, it was a more gradual decline. And, we can also see just the impacts overall in the economy. So this group diagram here really does kind of show you the point of how many kids that people were having in different parts of the world. And what we can see that, in Africa, there was really high fertility rates of 6 to 7 kids. But in a lot of places, it's just 0, 1 to 2 kids. And this is actually statistics from 2021. So when you have higher literacy rates, you have better income and better nutrition. And also your child survival rate also increases. And we can also see that in time, there's going to be an increase in urbanization. And when we are looking at urban population, the world is majority, urban. And when studies have been done, we see that every year that's been added to education, especially for women at reproductive age, child mortality decreases by 9.9%, and that's pretty significant. And, kind of looking at this picture again, we see the indication of regional fertility rates. And Africa is a very large region where you have really high fertility rates. But in other parts of the world, it's below the replacement fertility rates. And we see the purple color, we see, places like in Canada, and then those are actually below your replacement fertility rates. Also, when you're kind of looking at Russia as well, it's below that number. So we see the population is really declining in those areas, and it does not account for people moving in and moving out. And so, what's happening right now is that the green and the yellow areas are pretty close to replacement, but very few parts of the world except for your sub-Saharan Africa, where there's population growth rates are really increasing. You might see that, some parts of the Soviet Union and Middle Eastern also, we see that's just close to replacement fertility rates. And when we look at what's going on and where are some of the largest cities at, New York, Tokyo, New Delhi, Shanghai, Mexico City, we see there are 34 mega cities in currently, but we expect that when we reach 2030, we expect that number to be about 44 mega cities. And all major continents in the world, except for Australia, that has a mega city. And we can also look at what is going on in, certain parts of Asia. And that number is really below that replacement fertility ratio. And a lot of the government, a lot of governments worldwide, they're offering tax breaks, housing assistance, discounts, for childcare. We also looked at South Korea and in Singapore, where the government is actually providing lots of incentives. In Norway, they're giving $550 to the parents for the first 2 years, providing additional money for, whatever needs, childcare or for food, shorter working hours, and just kind of trying to do, their best to kind of get that high fertility rates. So basically what we are actually seeing currently, between the 1960s to 1985, that number was going down because there has been an increase in contraceptive. So most parts of the world, we actually see that people do not want to have kids anymore because of the amount of money that you need to actually educate them and to bring them up. And just kind of looking at this, before I end, that's kind of looking at world population growth rates. We see that fertility rates are going down, but your population rates are going up, and this kind of shows it in this picture. Uh, Even though your fertility rates are down, your population rates are going up. And basically, what we notice is that because there's just so many of us, and if everyone is having kids, you're going to see that increase in population. And if you have a fertility rate that falls in this blue line, it starts to level off. Okay, so if you have about 1.5 kids, that is going to drop in terms of population growth. So we have high, medium, and low projection. basically your low level of projection is 1.5. Your medium projection is based on your current replacement fertility rate, and your high fertility rate is basically above 2.5. And so, when kind of looking at what we expect, based on just your different numbers, we actually kind of see that around the world, your replacement fertility rates are basically below 1.5. And currently, we are actually at 1.6. But what we expect that, in 2030, they expect that number to go down significantly. And in about 2053, they kind of expect a much more lower rate of, below your 1.5. And so what we can really see is that if because all this is not set in stone, and that's why we use high, medium, and your low projection rates, and this can really change. But more so than ever, there's enough evidence that kind of shows that your fertility rates are going to be more on the lower end of the spectrum. And with that, I'm actually going to end here.